Hi, fancy seeing you here.
Right, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yes, I am great. I'm very much looking forward to the interview.
Yes, me too. It's been overdue, but life has continued to get in the way for both of us in 2021.
Yeah, it seems to be the theme, to be honest. Right, so are you ready to start the interview?
I think I'm ready. I am looking forward to turning the tables on you for a
Yeah,
change.
this
I
this
do have some of my own questions for you later.
ooh, this is going to be interesting. I'm looking forward to it. But you will be the first artist that's interviewing me. A couple have had some questions, but it's usually like one at the end rather than an actual sort of interview. So I'm looking forward to it. Right, are you ready for the first question?
Yeah.
Perfect. So, what are the main differences that you found between the music industry in the UK compared to Japan and the US?
I think the UK, one of its biggest strengths is that it's quite diverse and it's a lot more of a melting pot, I suppose. Because there is diversity within the US industry and Japan, but I feel like things are a lot more boxed in and people very rarely venture outside of their genres or they're scared to kind of mix ingredients, which is something that I absolutely love to do. And that seems to be less of an issue in the UK. I feel like artists are given a little bit more free rein to blur the boundaries. And a perfect example was when I was working with Curtis Young, who's Dr. Dre's son. And with my background being primarily in like commercial and pop, to be put together with a hip hop artist, like a proper West Coast hip hop artist. When he first heard the tracks that we were going to be working on together, he was like, "This is crazy." His go-to word was "crazy," and that's why on one of the songs he describes it as the new school or like the new sound, just because the idea of combining two genres the way that we did was just so foreign to him as an American artist.
That's wonderful to hear, honestly. It's nice that you found that UK artists are given more room to experiment and be themselves.
Yeah, I mean, the every market and every industry has its pros and cons. I suppose the biggest detriment of the UK is how exclusive and cliquey it seems to be compared to at least the other territories I've had experience in. Obviously, I can't speak for the world as much as I'd like to, but yeah, the one of the reasons I ended up debuting in Japan. I mean, primarily because like I loved the Japanese music scene, and by the time I debuted, I'd already done a lot of work there. But a big driving force was the fact that no one in the UK really wanted to know, because, like I say, I like to mix up styles, and even though my work is very, very commercial, I'll take my influences from all over the place. Other than that, the UK just didn't find anything particularly astonishing about me. And the experiences we had at the time with UK A&Rs, tell me if you've had any similar experiences, but in the UK, as a young artist starting out, I was stunned to start learning that A&R managers walk around and act like they're the artists. Like I started learning stories about A&R managers who worked in the same office but refused to speak to each other because they were above conversation. And so they'd leave messages with each other's assistants rather than just walk across the floor and have a conversation. And it blew my mind. And so that's like the level of exclusivity that I felt like I was dealing with. And I've told this story a handful of times before, but now it has a lot more context. when I ditched my UK management and I was free, the first thing I did was start having conversations with labels in Japan. And quite frankly, one of the reasons I ended up signing my first album to EMI Universal was because I cold called my A&R manager, it wasn't my A&R at the time, but ended up being my A&R. He'd never heard of me before, didn't know who the hell I was. I'm sure he was Googling me while we were talking. And I had him on the phone. Can you believe this? I kept him on the phone it was the best part, 40 minutes, if not an hour. It's like I'm a chatterbox or something. But yeah, we just had this conversation, this get to know each other conversation from a cold call. And I tell people this, and it sounds so foreign because you would never do that in a million years with a UK A&R. Mm-hmm. They're just too exclusive, whereas the walls and the boundaries are a bit more relaxed and humble in Japan.
That's really cool. It's funny you said that about A&R being above having conversations with each other. No one should be above a conversation, and I do think that is an issue in the UK, is that people think that they're too important for a conversation with another human. You always need to know someone who knows someone who knows someone. You always need an in to get to where you want to be and where you need to go, and that's not always possible if you don't have connections. If you're just starting, it's impossible.
You can never know too many people, and you certainly can't have too many friends. And the irony of the A&R ego, I suppose, is if it wasn't for artists, A&Rs wouldn't have anything to do. They wouldn't have a job. Mm-hmm. And yet certain A&Rs go about their job like the artists are serving them rather than the other way around. And yeah, it just highlights one of many, many problems with certain record labels.
Yeah, and I don't feel like, obviously it's really, really difficult to manage artists. They are wonderful and amazing and incredible. No one knows how their minds work, but trying to organize people that are that artistic is very difficult. But unless you are an artist yourself, you don't understand how they work. I find it really difficult to understand when certain A&R people have always managed but never gotten into music themselves and don't quite understand what it's like to write your own songs, pour your heart out, to be put in such an awkward situation in a spotlight where your emotions are just lying there on the floor and everyone is staring at you.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so integral to have a certain level of knowledge about that process, at least. Again, I think it does largely come down to ego, because, like you say, the A&Rs that have that creative experience themselves, they have that first-hand knowledge and empathy and can accommodate that entire process to maximize the outcome. However, at the same time, I have come across managers who, being artists themselves, are kind of working their way forward as an artist, and they're, rather than striking the correct balance between management and artistry, they're essentially using their role as manager to further themselves as an artist. And again, that comes down to ego, because if you are a well-rounded artist and a well-rounded manager, you don't need to progress at the expense of other people.
No, not at all.
And taking the management role should be facilitating. And that's why you find that the best managers and agents who are also artists, you'll find are also the most humble, because they don't need that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's really unprofessional using your role to basically push yourself in that way. I don't know how to quite explain it, but using your management role to further your career, like, it's very unprofessional. You could be giving it to your own artists. If you want to further your career, use a different manager to manage you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Second question. How difficult do you find singing in Japanese, especially compared to your mother tongue?
I don't find it particularly difficult anymore, just because I've had plenty of practice. It is very different though, more so because of I have to memorize the meaning more in Japanese. Because I'm fluent in English, the meaning comes to me with the words as they come out my mouth. Like I don't have to think about it. It's just an emotive reaction when I'm performing it. Whereas Japanese, because I'm not fluent, and the words and the portions that I'm not fluent in, as well as remembering the lyrics, I have to remember the meaning so I can put the correct emotion behind it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's where it's really different. I guess it's a lot more methodical, singing and performing in a language you're not fluent in. But it does really help to have a certain level of understanding and a certain level of fluency, even if it's like minimal. It certainly helps, especially when it comes to performing live.
Yeah, it's something most artists don't try, is singing in a language that you don't speak. I know that I always stick to the ones that I know rather than try something different. You're right, like the level of emotion that you need to portray the song properly, you need to have a full understanding of what you're singing.
Yeah.
Right, are you ready for the third question?
See.
How has your music, presentation, and look evolved since you started performing?
It's a hot topic right now, as you can imagine, with the current album and the current look, as it were. And all I've ever really done is just try to be the most authentic version of myself in that moment. So people think that I've like changed, and I guess it is a kind of evolution, because every time you try something, you learn and you take it with you into your next phase, I suppose. But it has just genuinely been like me trying to get as much out as much of me into my work as possible. And I certainly think that as I've got older, as I've got more experience, and certainly as I've become more and more independent with my artistry, I've learned to just follow my instincts a lot more, and trust them, because ironically, whenever I've done that, whenever I've just done a project or an album that has been 100% me with no influence from anyone, it's always been either my most successful or my most popular work. And the projects that like haven't quite met the bar that's set by other albums, it's always been when I've been with a company or when I've been with an agency and they've had their input. And I suppose like it's to do with confidence. I guess it's like honing your craft as well, which obviously takes time. But thinking back, I like there's just been so many key moments. And if I just jump back straight to the beginning with the first album, it's kind of a perfect example, because being signed to a major, you can imagine how much influence and direction they tried to have. And even then, like at the very start, like I had a lot of experience as a producer and writer at that point, but I had minimal influence as an artist, minimal experience, sorry. And so suddenly I was like working with a major, and they were like, right, the album should be this, and it should sound like this, and you should produce like this, and blah, 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 blah. And it would have been really easy to have just kowtowed and put out an album that sounded like the artist that they wanted me to cite as an influence. And if EMI had their way, the first album would have been an entirely like dance EDM album, because the biggest asset of my profile was my remix credits. And so they wanted to maximize on that. And most of my remixes were all commercial club EDM. And so they were like, no, that's the focal point for us. So we want a dance album. And I was like, oh, well, I love making that music, but I feel like if I'm going to define myself as an artist, I'm so much more than just one genre. And so I had to fight. And the compromise was that we settled on a pop dance album. And I kind of loved that. That was the first taste of being like a sociopath in me. Because I was like, they were the ones that suggested pop dance. And I was like, that's such a grey term. It covers such a massive breadth of music. Like, I could get away with anything and they'd still, as long as they call it a pop dance album, it's fine. So I was like, yeah, okay, let's do a pop dance album, but I'll put a couple of ballads on there and a couple of other things that I really want. And they're like, yeah, it's fine, as long as you give us the singles that we need. So even then, when at the very start, with not much experience and the intimidation of working with a major label who really could have, if I'd have let them, created the album that they wanted to create. Even then, I was like, no, this still needs to have a considerable chunk of me in there. Yeah. And I think just as time has gone on, with each phase, I guess, of my musical journey, it's probably just more and more doses of me. And it's just got more and more concentrated. And like this current album that's coming out this year, it's no exception. It's the most authentic version of me right now. A lot of the themes on it, they're not new. This is what's interesting. A lot of the stuff was already there. And it's just the fact that now is the moment where it seems right and comfortable and logical to bring it into my work. And it's just authenticism, I suppose.
Well, I am super excited for the album. I honestly can't wait. And also, it has been lovely to watch you evolve and become more you, watching back through your music videos and listening back to your older music. It is wonderful to see the progression.
Thank you. Yeah, because I mean, as you can imagine, working with various companies in varying degrees of independence as well, people have tried to crowbar me into boxes. And the one thing that has constantly come up is the gender aspect and the gender presentation, I suppose. And from a corporate perspective, like, you can't really deny that the majority music consumer is female. And going by majority demographics, for like female consumers, like male artists, and the majority and trends want to see their male artists look a certain way and behave a certain way. So that's why, like, my presentation has had ebbs and flows, and there's been such a wide range and a striking variety, because at various points I've had various things said to me and various pressures put on me, which is absolutely fine. Like, you have to pick and choose your battles, and you also have to pick and choose your moments where you play the game, but make sure you're always doing it to your benefit. So when I have been put in that box, it's still me. I might be amplifying a different part of me, but it's still 100% me. Like, I would never put anything out there that I would look back on and be like, oh, you know what, like yeah, I can't claim that, like, that wasn't authentic. Like, authenticism has always been very, very important to me.
That's amazing, because there are so many artists that do change themselves and trying to fit into boxes and do not like their work. I've done it. Most of the artists in Queensons has done it at some point to fit, to be able to move forward in their career. So it's wonderful that you've managed to keep yourself in that aspect, and that everything that you release and have released is you. It's wonderful. So difficult to do.
It is. And don't get me wrong, there are projects that are more authentic than others. And there are some projects where I've definitely taken in consumerism and demographics. So, like, obviously, especially when you're signed to a label and you're working with management and publishers and things like that, they are focused on the business side of things. And obviously, you're an artist, you just want to be creative and follow your heart and whatnot. But in order to progress, like I say, sometimes you have to choose the moments where you play the game. There are some moments where you can take your work in that direction to keep the corporate side of things happy, and at the same time try and inject enough of your artistry and creativity in there so that you're satisfied as well. And in those scenarios, it is a case of trying to keep everybody as happy as possible. So it is really, really difficult. And I don't want to claim that like I've mastered it and every single thing that I put out there hasn't been compromised by the industry at all. It's just not true. It would be a lie. But I do like to think that from the start, I've never compromised on a certain level of authenticity in everything that I've done, at least.
That's incredible. Honestly, if you keep yourself intact and you keep your music and everything that you stand for intact, then you're the person that's winning.
Yeah, absolutely.
My next question, because obviously you've been so busy over the last year and a bit, is how have you been continuing as a full-time musician over lockdown and COVID-19?
I really do think the Panini has been an opportunity for fully fledged and well-rounded indie artists to shine, because even within the indie realm, there are artists that are really nothing without a team behind them, even when it comes down to just making music, which is absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But then you have the artists who can sit down in a studio alone and 4 hours later give you a song out of thin air. And it's those artists that often have so much influence, if not control, over their entire creative output. So their image, their photography, their video, they truly are like the indies of the indie, as it were. And I mean, on my journey, I've been doing this long enough to have learned enough about all of that, particularly the video side of things. I think during the panorama is one of my biggest strengths, because the shift to going online when there really wasn't anything else available, the artists who had a good grasp on their visual presentation were like, oh, okay, this is our turn. And so right from the very beginning, I remember one of the first festivals that I did had a wide lineup, and the majority of the artists were in their living room on their sofa with like the laundry creeping into shot in the corner. And they had a guitar doing an acoustic set, which is fine under very few circumstances, because in my mind, the way I approached the switch to online was that you wouldn't, like, if you were booked for Glastonbury, you wouldn't stumble up on stage in your pajamas and fluffy slippers with like your mug of coffee and like, yeah, you were booked as a headline act, and it's like, my band's not here, so I'm going to do an acoustic set for you now. Yeah, like, why would you use it as an opportunity to make minimal effort? And like I say, under few circumstances, like those artists that truly didn't have an alternative, better than nothing, you know what I mean? But after a certain point, it just became lazy, especially when I started seeing all the major artists doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And they're at home, they're on like primetime network TV on a horrific, terrible quality webcam in baggy t-shirt or whatever, and like either doing an acoustic set or with their AirPods in so that like some producer at the label can engineer the sound for them. And it just made me mad, because I entered into the switch to live stream. The reason why I straight away jumped to having my two pre-recorded dancers, Romy and Michelle, I didn't want to compromise on what I was planning on delivering to my audience, because last year was going to be all about touring anyway. The second I started booking live streams, I thought, right, how can I deliver a Bentley Jones show to the people who are watching a live stream? Well, a Bentley Jones show would probably involve dancers. I can't get dancers because of social distancing, so I'll pre-record my own and have like the lead singer version of me live, and then it's something closer to what I would put on stage. And it was the effort it's supposed to be your job. You're supposed to be a professional. So there's a certain standard that, as far as I'm concerned, you shouldn't dip below unless you're under the most extreme circumstances. Mm. And I'm sorry, particularly the major artists who had the resources and the funding behind them. Every single time I saw one of them pop up in their living room on their sofa, I just saw red. It made me so angry because I just thought, so lazy, and it just drove me to put them to shame. And that's why I ended up being as busy as I was last year. That's why I ended up doing live streams from film studio that I found in the city. So I was like, I need to raise the bar here. This is getting really depressing.
I'm really glad that it wasn't just me that it made angry, that you were angry about that as well. They have mansions. They probably have little tiny or massive studios or even concert halls. they could have done something different. I mean, even their security cameras would be better quality than some of the cameras that most of the artists were working with at that point. So they could have put in a bit of effort. I understand that it was difficult for everyone and that a lot of people just felt drained and couldn't do stuff, but also people like you became the innovators. They changed the boundaries and made something incredible out of such a difficult situation. And I've seen some of your lockdown videos and it's amazing. Like, I remember seeing part of one where you were singing in the bathroom and it looked like you were singing on a massive stage. It's incredible, and it draws people in and makes them feel like they are watching a show with thousands of other people, and that is what artists needed to strive for at that point, was to be able to make their fans feel like they were back to normal and keep them entertained, because anyone can do the sofa acoustic thing with not a lot of effort. And
exactly,
yeah,
it was the effort level that did it for me. And even in the strictest of lockdowns, like the one that you saw when like I had my bathroom moment. But that whole thing, because we entered into the latest lockdown that the UK is currently coming out of, and it was the strictest restrictions that we had at that point. And the film studio that I had been using was closed. And that in itself was a massive, massive blow, because I had a live stream tour lined up. And so when they closed the studio, I was like, well, that's it. Literally tried everything I can think of. And especially like because I live alone as well, like the restrictions on who I was able to mix with, it just seemed impossible. But it was when I was hanging out with one of my collaborators, Alex, because I have so much equipment here as it is. Mm-hmm. We were just spitballing ideas, and it was like, well, we can still do it from home. And it's not even about the standard. It's about maintaining the effort level. You know what I mean? So it's like, well, if I were to do it from home, I approached my home live stream the same way I would approach a show. And that's why we like did it as like a little tour around the house, because I just moved here. That's how we ended up with like the boudoir segment, because that's exactly what I would do for a show. The only difference would be that there's a stage and I'd hopefully have a team of people to help me. But knowing that it was just the two of us under the most ridiculous restrictions, we felt gave us a lot of leeway to, like, as long as we maintain that effort level, then people don't mind.
Yeah.
Because we're all in the same boat. But yeah, I wasn't prepared to. It would have been really easy to like, oh well, like I'm only allowed one person in my house to work with. I'll pull out one of those sofa acoustic sets, and it was like, no, that's not Bentley Jones. And it's certainly not what I'm about right now.
No, and it did make you shine through the lockdown. Like, it was really obvious the standard of material that you were releasing was miles ahead of 99.9% of the industry.
Oh, thank you.
No, it's true.
Yeah.
You put so much effort into everything. It's incredible. So I'm gonna change this question a bit. What was it like working on your latest video, One, and talk about it, because it's such an incredible video. I love it. Actually, I think Christine stole the show, personally.
I do love what Christine sent in. It was so fabulous and so perfect. I loved the attention to detail that Christine put into her clip. The fact that it was like framed and graded, and also the fact that it was Queen of Hearts. It was perfect.
I didn't notice that the first time I watched it, and I just sent it to you immediately, and then you said that, I was like, oh, and then had to rewatch it.
Kicking yourself, because that's like the genius part of it.
The entire thing was genius. The background, the presentation, her stance to the side, it was captivating.
It really was. It's going to sound contrived because it's my latest video, but it is certainly one of my favorites for sure. I do so much work by myself, and a lot of being a commercial artist, I find, does involve a certain level of vanity. For better or worse, that's not always a bad thing. So when I get a project like One, and I've done a few of them over the course of my work, it fuels me so much. And when the clips started coming in, when the Faces of Pride in Miami were announced, and I saw all of these people, and I had a hard drive that, like, every time someone sent it in, I'd chuck it on the hard drive so I could put it all in the edit together. And just seeing all the people and the faces, and just getting a glimpse of their journey and the reasons and their motivations for being a part of a project like this, and to see them all together just on the hard drive before I'd even started editing was just so magical. And it truly was what I wanted the project to encompass, was the unity and diversity and representation. Because for all the critiques of the commercial and corporate side of our community, the community itself and the essence of it is just, it's so beautiful, and it's so intricate and far-reaching, and to try and encapsulate it in one project like this, it's a mammoth task. If we wanted to include all of the faces to a point where I would end up satisfied, it would be like a 25-minute long song at least. But yeah, just to create something like One, it just warms my heart. It would have been nothing without the people who submitted their clips and ended up in the video with me. It would have been a 2 compared to where it is right now, which is like a 12.
It's honestly such an incredible video, and does encompass everything you were talking about, of the diversity and love and acceptance. Everyone I know that's watched it has been crying. It's not just me. It's, oh my God, I'm part of this incredible community. I'm not alone. There's people like me. There's people so diverse and so amazing. It's a beautiful reminder.
That is exactly what I wanted to amplify, I suppose. Because, I mean, it's no secret, and we're like, the LGBTQ plus community is exactly the same as any other community, in the sense that it has its good parts and bad parts, and sometimes it can be a little bit self-critical and self-judgmental, and has that exclusivity that really repels me. But I certainly don't want to tar the community with that brush in its entirety, and that, I suppose, was also one of the motivations, because to me that's not what my community stands for. And anyone who has experienced that in any part of their life, and I certainly have a growing pile of stories to tell, as most LGBTQ plus people do, then I wanted to have this project as kind of a symbol and a reminder that no matter how alone you feel, there is always someone somewhere who is like, oh, you're having a bad day, they will give you a hug and sit down and have a cup of tea with you.
Even if it's a stranger.
Yes. Oh my God, yes. Some of the kindest exchanges I've had have been with complete strangers.
Same.
Yeah. Yeah, no one needs to be alone. So if one stands for anything and it represents anything, then it's that. It's reminding you that there is always someone somewhere out there, like, who's rooting for you.
Right, before I start crying, let's go on to a bit of a more serious conversation, which is something that I ask all the Queen Sounds artists, is have you felt discrimination due to your sexuality or gender identity?
Yeah. This could be the shortest answer of the entire interview. Yes.
All the other interviews I've done so far, it is the longest answer.
Don't mind elaborating if you really insist. But
it's up to you. We don't have to. We can move on if you want.
Yeah, no, I would love to. I think it's an important topic, and I'm not surprised that it's the one that we all have the most to say about, because it's kind of absurd in 2021, but yeah, it's still happening. We still have a long way to go, and that's why these conversations need to keep happening until it stops being so surprising. Most people in our community have a whole pile of stories, and the more and more as time goes on, and the more I experience them myself, I see the other things that other people have to go through. I just find myself getting more angry about it. And maybe it's like an age thing. Maybe it's because as you get older, you just develop a more rooted sense of self and confidence. But I feel I've always been quite vocal about it. But as time has gone on, I'm just getting more and more vocal, more and more angry. And that's why I've got no qualms in just putting my experiences out there up front and center. Like that line from I Don't Really Care. Well, I guess he can sing, but how are we going to deal with the whole gay thing? Again, like I say, people are shocked when I tell them that last part is a verbatim quote from my own manager. And he felt it was appropriate to ambush me during a work call. And we were talking about something else entirely. And he literally interjected and said, oh, and by the way, how are we going to deal with the whole gay thing? And at that moment, we'd never discussed it. He made an assumption. And I was so caught off guard. And I was shocked by the nerve and the fact that it was such a blunt approach from someone on my own team. And I mean, that's just one story. I've been signed to 2 majors. At both majors, I witnessed secondhand homophobia. It wasn't directed at me, but I was involved in a conversation where it was directed at somebody else. And one of those companies, that was actually one of the biggest contributing factors to me deciding to leave and just abandon my contract, because I wasn't prepared to work with those kinds of people. Like I say, huge pile. If you got time, like I could just reel through. There's been so many moments. And the sad thing about it is that this response, my response, and I would imagine all the responses that you've heard to this question are the same in the sense that there's been so many instances of varying degrees of discrimination. And like I said before, we've made so much progress, but when these stories stop and our experiences aren't as shocking and surprising, it's like, oh, that's still happening in 2020. Yes, it's still happening in 2021. Then yeah, that's when we can say, like, oh, we're getting closer to where we need to be. But there's been so many huge and important steps, but we are still a long ways off.
Yeah, I agree. It's only about 1 in 10 artists I found that haven't experienced any sort of discrimination, which is a start because I expected it to be 0. But yeah, It's funny that you should say how you've become more vocal as you've grown as an artist and as a person. I feel the same. I think that when you first start in the industry and you first start having those issues, you take it very personally. But as you unfortunately get used to it, but also see it happening to others, you start to fight back and you realize that it isn't a problem with you and you're not doing anything wrong, and it's a problem with them. They need to be educated, and also you need to protect the others who haven't had the experiences that you've had.
Exactly. You're 100% right, especially when you first enter into the industry. You feel like you have so much to lose and you're a lot more careful, I suppose. I know I certainly was. But yeah, when you start establishing standards for yourself and that you're not prepared to compromise on in any way, shape, or form, then you realize when you encounter the next moment, there's really nothing to lose, because the alternative is working with these people.
And it continuing, and then continuing to think it's okay to bully people.
Exactly. And the second you go down that path, you're almost helping facilitate. The second instance that I mentioned when I was with a major, I remember it so clearly. We were at a dinner and it was the entire executive team, so including my A&R manager, and they started joking around about one of the other staff members. They were making assumptions and suspecting about their sexuality, but they were laughing about it and being very derogatory. And it was just this out-of-body experience, because I'm there like as their artist, as their producer, as their writer, and I'm surrounded by a higher mid, like top level team, and there was about 10, 12 of us. And I'm like, is this happening? Like, do they realize what they're saying? Have they forgotten that I'm in the room? Like, not only was I angry for whoever it was that they were talking about, and I hadn't met this person, but for that conversation to happen in my presence was an insult to me. And I took that fact very, very personally. And that's when I really questioned myself and said, you need to make a decision here. You're choosing to align yourself with these people, or you can take a stand and find another place where or find other people that share the same values as you, even if that means going out on your own, which is what I ended up doing for a while after that.
I don't understand that, like, locker room trash talk that happens. I really don't. It's disgusting, it's insulting, and for them not to be able to say it in front of the person's face is also childish. I don't know what I would have done in your situation. Probably something that would have caused a scene.
I did cause a bit of a scene, because to kind of interject like that is not a cultural norm, as you can imagine, in Japan. And like I say, I was literally alone at this table with these 10 other people because they were all having a jolly good time. In that moment, I didn't even really think about it in terms of alienating the people in the company that I was currently in a contract with. I just put my drink down and I was like, I really don't think that's appropriate. And I don't think you realize the person that is in the room with you, because I'm finding this very, very offensive. The interjection is counter to Japanese culture, but to express that I was offended by what they were saying in their behavior obviously triggers the honor code, and it stopped straight away and they took it very seriously and apologized, but it shouldn't have happened in the first place.
No,
like, that's the point.
No, you're completely right, and fair play, honestly. Most people would have sat there and just done nothing.
It really was serendipitous as well. That was my last day of that current trip. That's one of the reasons why we had the dinner. And I flew back to the UK the next morning. And I think I made a request to dissolve my contract within the following week.
Right, so my next question is kind of going on from something we were talking about earlier, which is, do you think video representation is important for music?
I honestly think it depends on the artist, because I know artists who don't have the visual presentation as a priority, and the priority for them is the music and the strength of the music, and having their songs and their compositions speak for themselves. And I think all approaches are perfectly valid, which is why I say I think it depends entirely on the artist. When I work, and right now, obviously, with the journey that I've been on, taking control of my visual presentation, the production of my videos. But even from the beginning, I have to emphasize, before I learned anything about any of that, when I compose, I do it visually. I know there's a word for it. You probably know what it is. But when I'm composing my music, I visualize colors.
Synesthesia.
Yes, that's it. Yes.
Oh, that makes so much sense now. I know some incredible artists that have synesthesia, and it's always to do with music and visualization, so always to do with color. And it's so interesting listening to them talk about their music, because they were just like, right, and then I wanted to transition from blue to purple. I'm just sat there like, this is fascinating, but I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, when I compose, it's very instinctive. So I like to kind of let the journey take me, rather than kind of try and direct myself. I guess that comes back to me being like very instinctive. So I generally let whatever I'm starting to write tell me what the kind of visual representation is. And sometimes it is as basic as a color. And that's why, I don't think I've ever mentioned this before, that's why the typography for a set of the singles from the album, there's a reason why the color palette is the way it is. Because when I composed Girl, the majority of it came to me in a dream, and the dream itself had visuals with it. But when I was in the studio, it was all about like pinks, purples, and blacks, which is the main reason why the typography for Girl on the cover and the promo is pink. Not because it's my favorite color, because it is, but because that's what I visualized when I was writing it. And I Don't Really Care was all yellows and oranges. So that's why the video has a really strong yellow palette and the typography is orange. The same with Oyasumi, it was all blues, like baby blues and gradients into white. And the entire video for Oyasumi is blue.
That's so interesting, because I've always said that your visuals are stunning and work so well with the song. And that now makes so much sense.
I think, to be honest, it's helped drive my journey to learn about the visual presentation and particularly video production, because I'd work and compose with these visuals. And for the longest time, I'd just be kicking myself like, oh, I wish I could somehow manifest what I'm seeing inside my twisted brain. And it was a driving force behind learning video production. So now when I'm doing videos, like Stars and Magnet is a perfect example, because it was all like the song spoke for itself. So it was all very interstellar, and the song has a concept. So I already had that space visual interstellar kind of going on in my mind. And then my friend in Tokyo, Katie, was the one who, when she first heard it, she said, I see you stranded on the moon, and like there's such a sense of loneliness in the song. If you were like on the moon and you couldn't like get a signal, it would just be you. You'd feel so isolated, and you can see the earth where all the people you know and all the things you know are, but there's no way to connect to it. And once she planted that visual, I was like, I need to achieve that. I need to achieve that in film form. How do I go about doing that as an indie artist using indie budgets and indie resources?
And that video.
But thank you. It was really a labor of love, because my OCD kicked in as well, and I wasn't prepared to compromise on the video for Stars and Magnets. It would have been very easy to have said, oh no, that concept is too complicated, let's tone it down a bit. I was like, nope. I've sourced a spacesuit and I know how to do 3D special effects.
I've thought of that. How did you get a spacesuit?
It's David Bowie's spacesuit.
Why am I only hearing about this now?
Seriously, like my obsession with Bowie, like peaked, and now like that's my claim to fame. It's the same spacesuit from the Black Star video.
Right. So the next question is, do you think it's important to evolve, which we've touched on already, so you don't need to answer that. But what are you personally learning at the moment?
Bringing my gender fluidity into like the center of my work for the first time, it's really opened my eyes to certain issues that I just haven't been exposed to before, like particularly the trans experience. It's been really easy as an outsider to just kind of like operate in my own bubble, you know what I mean? So even though I fully identify as a non-binary person and a non-binary artist, I have kind of bypassed the trans experience and the trans journey. So really kind of like opening my eyes to that and learning about it through other people's experiences has really been fascinating. I'm always fascinated by other people's stories anyway, because I believe that's probably the main reason why most of us are here. From day one, we walk through this plane and we should just be absorbing as much of it as we possibly can while we're here. And I've learned like that you learn the most, and also the most interesting, the most relevant, because they're first-hand experiences, from listening to other people and hearing about their past. So that's definitely been an eye-opener through the process of this particular album. But in terms of learning in general, yeah, I believe we all should be anyway. The second that we can claim like, nope, we're done, we've learned all that we need to learn, it's like, okay, now you can jump in your grave.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you just said. That really resonated with me, because learning is like a drug for me. I just can't seem to stop. Like every time that I'm like, right, I need a break, I need to just be me for a bit and stop forcing myself to have all this information pushed into my brain, I then start again. Right, so are you ready to talk about the upcoming album?
Yes, well, I suppose I should, since it's allegedly my job.
Right, so what's the theme of your upcoming album? What are the subjects that inspired you to write it, and when is it coming out?
So, for the longest time, this album didn't have a title and it didn't have a concept. And it's certainly been the most interesting journey I've ever had with an album. The fact that I've been sitting on it now, like from start to finish, it's been 2 years. And in 2 years, so much has happened and I've dealt with so much. I did joke with one of my fans actually that I should call the album the Cursed Album and the cover should just be black, nothing else, just black. Because honestly, like my life at the start of this album was so the opposite of what it is right now. Like it just so many times, like at least like a handful, my entire life has been flipped on its head. And I'm just like, oh, okay, I'm starting all over again. So there's a lot of introspective and reflection, and kind of like in those moments, you do have to kind of humbly sit on the floor where you've been knocked down, take a deep breath, and kind of assess where you're at, what's happened to you, what you can learn from that in order to progress to a better place and figure out where that better place is since you've just been knocked completely off track. So without revealing too much, because I haven't announced the album concept, the album title, or the artwork yet, even though it's just finished. So excited. But yeah, that theme definitely runs through, and it's probably why I ended up getting stuck on the name for this album. I came up with the name quite a while ago, at least 6 months ago, and every time I deviated away from it, I always came back, just because of what life was dealing me. So as always, I've taken the journey and had it told me what the album concept should be and what the title should be. So there's a lot of themes of that. And a lot of those experiences have involved my moments in the industry, my moments where I've been crowbarred into one of those boxes. And it's often to do with my brand, how I personally present my work, present myself. So that's why those topics are very, very prevalent. And that's why I probably have said this about every single album at some point. I think every artist does. But it's definitely, I feel like even in hindsight, I will be able to say that this album is more important, not necessarily significant or relevant, because they've all had that same level. I just think this one is a bit more important and parallel to my life experiences and a lot of what has gone on in the world as well the last 2 years. And mentioning that, I do need to clarify that there is not one mention of the panorama at all. Like, I'm talking about all the other crazy stuff that the panorama has tried to distract us from.
Amazing. Oh, I'm really, really looking forward to it. I genuinely can't wait.
Thank you. I'm excited now. It's like, I do feel like every album is a baby that has to be birthed. And you hear a lot of artists talk of it like that. When you think of it in that sense, it's been a 2-year labor. And I'm ready for this to be out now.
So, my last question for you is, are there any artists that you would like to recommend?
Oh gosh.
Just to put you on the spot.
Yeah. See, this is the problem. Like, I'm sure you can contest that artists are asked this all the time. Like, either, can you recommend an artist? What are you listening to right now? What's your favorite artist or favorite song? The problem with me, I'm generally more of a fan of song than artists. So all of my playlists, like, they're at least 100 songs long, and they're just the most random, higgledy-piggledy, wonderful thing of randomness. And I could maybe tell you the song title, I could probably sing you the song, but I always forget who it is. So, but because there's a lot of R&B and soul influences on this album, then a lot of artists from that genre have kind of really played a pertinent part in my world the last couple of years. But the one that springs to mind immediately is JoJo.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly, I mean, for starters, incredible vocalist. It's kind of sickening to watch her sing live because it just falls out of her mouth and I'm like, but her journey, because she's had such a tumultuous journey through the industry, and she had that terrible experience with her record label and the contract that she was in, and really had to come back from that. And I mean, I love her story, but I personally do feel like what the person and the version of herself that she came back with was so superior. And I'm just all about her latest work. I just think it's fantastic. So I would recommend JoJo. Yay, I have one for a change.
Amazing. I am not familiar with JoJo, so I am definitely going to look at her work. Thanks.
Yeah, she's, I'm not sure if she's independent now or not. She might have rejoined a major. I know for a long period she was independent, but she was signed really, really young, like 12 or 13. And like, I think her breakthrough here in the UK was Leave, Get Out. Okay.
No.
So yeah, and people think she was like a child star and disappeared, but in actual fact, she was trapped in an awful record deal that she couldn't escape. And so like she never stopped making music, and she never stopped being an artist. And yeah, it's an incredible journey. So yeah, definitely have a look into it, and then listen to her latest original stuff, because she did go back and re-record some of her back catalogue, but some of her new stuff is, yeah, it's fantastic.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Bentley. I'm really looking forward to that. Also, thank you so much for the interview.